So this video is part 6 of the Mushoku Tensei series on this channel. And if you guys haven't watched the previous parts, then make sure to check out them as well. So after returning from Shironi, Rudy reviews his discussion with Orsted where they came up with 3 courses of action. The first is to use the Rudy Mercenary Company for intelligence gathering. The second is to make connections with influential people with political power and warn them of the war that will occur in 80 years. Ariel, the next queen of Asura Kingdom, and Cliff, the grandson of the Pope of the Millis religious order, are also included in their list. The third is to gather warriors who will help Orsted to fight Laplace in his place. So they plan to gather those whose fate is already to fight Laplace and who won't easily become Hitagami's disciple, such as Ogre God, Dwarf God, Disciples of Water God Style and Sword God Style, North God Karuman III, Death God Randolph, and Rudeus. Rudy also considers the fact that Hitagami will likely try to influence people within Rudy's organization and disrupt their plans. So Rudy reasons that since Hitagami is limited to only 3 disciples, the plan is to have a large enough organization that the effect of 1 or 2 betrayals doesn't cause significant disruption to their plans. Rudy also brings up with Orsted the need for a method of communication when they are separated. Orsted suggests creating a device similar to the 7 Great World Powers stone monuments and Adventurer Guild cards, and Orsted intends to build the communication device himself. Lastly, Rudy wants a method for transporting his magic armor Mark I, which is quite bulky. He plans to use summoning magic, but he is currently unable to summon inorganic matter. But Rudy hopes that with some practice, he will be able to do this as well. Then Rudy visits Cliff. But Cliff and Elise were having sex earlier in the day when Rudy tries to visit. Cliff had a haggard appearance when he greets Rudy, which has been the case since his child was born. Elise also greets Rudy while breastfeeding her baby, and then Cliff reveals that he has received a letter from his grandfather in Millis. The letter expresses how the grandfather cares for Cliff's well-being and looks forward to Cliff's return. The letter also warns Cliff that there is conflict within the Millis religious order, and that Cliff should prepare himself for this if he decides to return. So Cliff indicates that his initial intention was to return to Millis after graduating, and that he was prepared to deal with the scheming within the Millis religious order. However, now that Cliff has a family, he is concerned for the well-being of his son Clive, as the Millis religious order readily targets the weak, and Cliff isn't confident that he can protect his son. Furthermore, Cliff's grandfather is still unaware that Cliff has married an elf, and Cliff worries about the scandal this might trigger, as some factions of the Millis religion persecute anyone who isn't human. Therefore, Cliff is conflicted. On one hand, he wants to return home, but on the other, he realizes that he would be exposing his wife and child to danger, and because of his wife's elf heritage, his grandfather might be put in danger as well. Even Rudy doesn't know what the right decision is, so Rudy offers for Cliff to join Orsted's faction. Cliff would receive Rudy's and Orsted's support, and this would also protect Cliff's family. In return, Cliff would prepare for Laplace's revival. Rudy explains the plan in detail to Cliff, and about their plan to prepare for the battle with Laplace 80 years in the future. Rudy feels he's offering Cliff a good deal, but Cliff asks for more time to think about the offer. Although Rudy is confused as to why Cliff doesn't agree right away, he respects the request for more time to decide. Cliff plans to give Rudy an answer at the graduation ceremony, which is in 2 months. Meanwhile, Rudy visits Xenoba, and as Xenoba is no longer a prince, he has sold off his royal possessions to raise money and bought a house near Rudy's house, and he lives there with Ginger and Julie. Rudy also pays Xenoba a salary for research and development on the magic armor. So Rudy enters Xenoba's home to find Xenoba and Julie making dolls together. Rudy asks Xenoba to resume their project to produce and sell Rudyard's dolls, because Rudy hopes that this will allow him to more easily find Rudyard, so that he can recruit Rudyard in the fight against Laplace, and partly to simply meet Rudyard again. Another motivation for resuming the production of the figures is to draw in craftsmen who may also have ideas for improving the magic armor. So after discussing some more work-related and personal things, Xenoba and Julie agree to start mass-producing Rudyard figures. So later, Cliff visits the staff at the university and submits his thesis on how to suppress curses. The staff at Renoa University are enthusiastic, and they feel this research is going to be recorded in the history books. However, the top graduates are already decided, and so although his thesis was the best of that season, Cliff will not be recognized as a top graduate. But Cliff doesn't mind this. In the past, he may have thrown a tantrum, but over the years he has changed and no longer feels the need to have the title of the top graduate. Cliff wants to return to Millis, but he doesn't want to endanger his family. He thinks on Rudy's proposal of join Orsted. He knows that almost all his growth was thanks to Rudy, but for some reason he doesn't like this fact. Later, when he's leaving the university, he finds Norn in the student council in a discussion over a wraith who is draining the mana of the students. Norn is conflicted, as there aren't any adventurers or priests available with exorcism magic to defeat the monster, but she doesn't want to ask her brother for help. So Cliff decides to help Norn, and together with the student council, they go to the basement warehouse. This warehouse has several relics, and due to a cleaning proposed by Norn, someone possibly destroyed the old seal which sealed the Wraith. Soon, the group finds the Wraith and start to fight. The Wraith controls various skeletons, whose skill is proportional to the skill of the person while they were alive. Soon, the student council group starts to fall apart, but Cliff uses his magic eye, finds the weak point of the Wraith, and defeat the Wraith with his magic. They then discover that the Wraith was born because hundreds of years ago, a teacher locked some students in a room who ended up dying. So Cliff and the student council make an honorary funeral for the deceased students. Later, Cliff asks Norn why she didn't ask Rudy for help. She answers that she wanted to do everything by herself, as much as possible. They then talk about their future plans. Cliff asks Norn if she will ask Rudy for help in the future. She responds that she wants to use the knowledge that she's gained at school and to see her own limits. Cliff thanks Norn, and in turn, she also thanks Cliff for helping her for all those years. So in the 2 months before the graduation ceremony, Rudy and Xenoba worked on setting up their first storefront. They were supported with advice from a member of their mercenary group, who used to own a store but failed. Rudy reflects on how he was hesitant to accept advice from someone who failed, but still decided to give him a chance. They set up their shop as a small warehouse on the outskirts of the workshop district. The small warehouse has enough room to carry their inventory, and it has an associated storefront. Then, at the graduation ceremony, Cliff and Xenoba are lined up with the rest of the graduates. Xenoba was allowed to graduate despite recently dropping out, since he's a special student. There are about 500 graduates, and the student council led by Norn is present as well. Brooklyn von Eruzeis, a graduate from the royalty of Neris Dukedom, was recognized at the ceremony as a graduate representative. Rudy sees Cliff, who has a listless face. Rudy notes that Cliff in the past would have been angry at not being chosen as representative. After all, Cliff's achievements at Renoa overshadows all the other graduates. He achieved advanced rank in all 4 attack magics, advanced rank in healing magic, advanced rank in detoxification magic, intermediate rank barrier magic, and advanced rank exorcism magic. On top of that, there is his thesis on suppressing curses. Rudy then looks closer at Cliff's face and recognizes that he looks troubled. Rudy speculates that this is because Cliff still hasn't decided on whether to accept Rudy's offer to join Orsted. After the graduation ceremony, Rudy meets with Xenoba and congratulates him. Xenoba notes that although he thought the graduation ceremony would be just an annoyance, he actually enjoyed it. The graduation representative, Brooklyn von Eruzeis, introduces himself to Rudy and challenges him to a duel. Brooklyn acknowledges that he was only recognized as a graduation representative due to his family's influence, and that his test results were always second to Cliff's. Brooklyn has wanted to test his strength against Rudeus ever since he defeated Batagati in one hit. Brooklyn explains that when he returns to his home country, he will inherit a position where he is responsible for his subordinates, and so will not have the opportunity to test his own strength at his own convenience. So after hearing his reasons, Rudy agrees to the duel. So Rudeus easily defeats Brooklyn, and Brooklyn seems to have known this was how it was going to go, and graciously accepts his loss. Other graduates then gather and challenge Rudy to duels as well. So after that, Rudy dueled with about 20 people, and they all left feeling satisfied. The duels weren't tiring for Rudy, but Xenoba, who was the referee, got tired. They then go to meet with Alinalise and Cliff, who were watching the duels from the rooftop. Rudy congratulates Cliff on his graduation, and then asks Cliff what his plans are. Cliff states that he will stay with his family for the next year, at least until Clive stops breastfeeding. As it takes 2 years to travel from Sharia to the Holy Land of Millis, Cliff wants to return home 2 years after graduation, as he feels obligated by a sense of duty. In terms of joining Orsted's company, Cliff declines for now. He wishes to climb the ranks of the Millis order with his own strength, without Orsted's support. Hearing this, Rudy is reminded of the people who challenged him to a duel earlier. It is the desire to test one's own ability. Once he stands at the top of the Millis order, Cliff will become Rudy and Orsted's associate. After 1 year, Cliff will leave his family behind for an indeterminate period of time, until he is at the top. Although not happy, Alinalise has accepted Cliff's decision. Meanwhile, Rudy is conflicted while thinking about Cliff's future. By respecting Cliff's decision, Rudy risks having Cliff in a position where he will be murdered, meaning that he will lose his connection to the Holy Millis Kingdom, as well as the person best at studying curses. But Rudy also acknowledges that allowing him to struggle alone may spur personal growth in Cliff. So Rudy decides to respect Cliff's decision. Rudy also thinks to himself that it may be 3 years before Cliff rejoins them. In the meantime, he plans to get in touch with Ariel and increase their mercenary force. So Cliff and Rudy finish their serious conversation, and they all go to celebrate Cliff and Xenoba's graduation. So after some time, Rudy has discovered how to effectively summon his magic armor by using bidirectional magic circles. Orsted has also made progress on a communication device. Although not a telephone, it is a lithographic communication device. Anything drawn on the main lithograph is copied onto the sublithograph. However, the device is heavy and consumes significant magic power, so it works best as a stationary device. The first pair has been installed in Orsted's office and one of Ariel's private rooms. In terms of Rudy's children, Lucy is now 5 years old. She learns magic from Sylphie and Roxy and learns to swing a stick with Therese. As an older sister, she also gives attention to her younger siblings Lara and Aris. Lara, who is going to be the future Messiah, is now 2 years old, and sacred beast Leo continues to always be by her side. Aris is now 1 year old, and he loves breasts. He smiles with delight whenever he is held and pressed against a female chest, but whenever Rudy holds him, he starts crying. Later, after Rudy's graduation, they go to a tavern to celebrate Cliff's farewell party. Cliff plans to set off on his own to Millis and climb the ranks on his own. Once becoming an executive officer, Cliff plans to return for Elinalise and his son Clive. So after the party, Elinalise pulls Rudy aside and asks him to go to Millis to support Cliff. Although Rudy previously promised Cliff that he wouldn't help him, Rudy agrees with Elinalise that Cliff would likely require his help. So Rudeus also decides to go to Millis. So Rudy returns home to Aisha, Norn, and Lilia, who were already at home. They have received a letter from Claire Latrea, who is Zenith's mother. The letter was a response to Rudy's letter, which was sent 5 years ago, which reported Zenith's illness. The letter commands Rudy to bring Zenith back to Millis, as well as Norn and Aisha. Rudy is initially surprised by the delayed response, but then remembers that it would take at least 2 years for mail to travel each way to Millis. He looks at his sisters, but Aisha and Norn indicate with their facial expressions that Claire is an unpleasant person to deal with. So, as Rudy was already planning to go to Millis, he states that he will go and bring Zenith as well. So Aisha protests that she was planning to set up a mercenary group in Xenoba's shop in the Kingdom of Dragon Kingdom. Rudy replies that he feels that their priorities should shift to Millis after receiving this letter. Norn outright refuses to go, as she wants to finish school. Rudy asks if Aisha would accompany him and Zenith to Millis, and she can also set up a mercenary group there. Rudy tells Aisha that she does not need to meet her grandmother. So Aisha happily agrees to go to Millis, and Lilia also agrees to accompany them to Millis. But Rudy wonders if Lilia is also reluctant to meet Claire, as Claire is likely an adherent of the Millis faith, which doesn't look favorably on polygamous marriages. Reflecting back on Norn and Aisha's reaction to their grandmother Claire, Rudy wonders what kind of person she's going to be. So Aisha starts preparing the paperwork she will need to set up a mercenary group in Millis. Cliff was informed that Rudy would also be heading to Millis, given the letter he received from Claire Latrea. Cliff didn't hate the idea of Rudy coming along, and in fact, he was relieved. So, Rudy, Lilia, Aisha, and Zenith will be heading to Millis, in addition to Cliff. Sylphie is staying home to manage the kids and housework. Roxy is staying home as well due to poor relations between the demon race and the Millis kingdom. Eris was prepared to go, but Lilia strongly advised her not to go, as Claire is a finicky individual and would likely not get along well with Eris. Just as the group was ready to leave, it was discovered that Sylphie is pregnant. Rudy notes that in the past he would have deliberated on whether to depart on the business trip or not, but right now he's running around the garden with glee. Lilia, in contrast, is panicking. She is torn between staying to support Sylphie and with accompanying Zenith to Millis. While Sylphie does have several supports, in the form of Roxy, Eris, and Elinalise, she also has 3 young children to look after as well. Rudy debates staying home while Sylphie is pregnant, to prioritize his family over work. Zenith then suddenly grabs Lila's hand and leads them to Sylphie, placing Lila's hand on Sylphie's shoulder. It was as if Zenith was trying to ask Lilia to look after Sylphie, and trying to say that she would be alright on her own, so Lilia should stay behind. Lilia therefore agrees to stay home and asks Aisha to take care of Zenith in her place. Soon they head off, and Rudy brings the lithograph for communication. He also brings a summoning scroll for the Mark I armor. Over the past month, Rudy has heard a lot about Claire Latrea. In summary, she's extremely stubborn and strict. From Norn, her only memories of Claire are of Claire getting angry at her for not doing well enough in her studies, while Aisha was scolded by Claire for doing better than Norn. As per Lilia, Claire is someone who values lineage and the Millis religion. However, Rudeus is not worried. as Claire's description reminds him of Sauros Boreas Greyrat. He reasons that as long as he is civil, he will be fine. Rudy then asks Cliff about the House Latrea as well. Cliff states that his House Grimoire and House Latrea are enemies. House Grimoire is a pro-magic race, while House Latrea is an anti-magic race. House Latrea also has produced several members of the Temple Knights, and Cliff muses that with Rudy's connection to House Latrea, will he eventually become his enemy? Rudy reassures Cliff that he has no intention of being his enemy. They joke that one of Rudy's kids can marry Cliff's kid Clive to solidify their friendship. So they use the teleportation circle in Orsted's office, which brings them to a forest for approximately 7 days of travel outside of Millis. They buy a horse carriage at a city and arrive at the capital of Holy Millis country, Militian. There, Rudy is amazed by seeing the beautiful white palace. Cliff agrees but says that the people who run it from the inside are dirty, sleazy, and unethical. Then they decide to take a carriage to Cliff's family's estate. So after 10 years, Cliff has returned to Militian. They enter through the Adventurers District, and they see lots of people of different races. They then see Geese, and Geese is very happy to see the group. He tells them what happened when they parted in Sharia. Geese arrived on schedule in the Asura Kingdom. There, he sold the magic stones for a fortune. His party members retired from being adventurers with their share and returned to their hometown. But Geese lost all his money to gambling and sank into debt. Talhand, seeing Geese's terrible state of debt, sold off his magic gauntlets, which took his entire fortune to produce, to pay off Geese's debts. So after that, Geese and Talhand came to Millis continent. From there, Talhand went back to his hometown, and Geese decided to return to adventuring to earn some money. Before entering the religious district, Geese says his farewells and leaves on his own once again. As suddenly as he appeared, he suddenly departed. Before leaving, he asks Rudy if he remembers Paul's words while they were in the labyrinth, and Rudy says he remembers them. So they arrive at Cliff's house by sundown. To Rudy's surprise, it is just an ordinary single-family home, as opposed to a large mansion. Cliff explains that his grandfather, the Pope, has a room at the headquarters, so this house isn't used. As it is already late, Cliff invites Rudy and his group stay at his home. They enter the house and find the place very dusty. Rudy volunteers Aisha to help with the cleaning, to Aisha's disgust. As a group, they clean the house and then have dinner. Rudy, Aisha, and Zenith all sleep in the guest room. Rudy asks Aisha if she wants to be his maid, as Lilia wishes, but Aisha is not sure. And they also discuss who Aisha's future love interest could be. So on the next day, they enter the Latrea residence. Rudy marvels at how large the house is. The guards immediately hurry towards the mansion the moment they see Zenith. Aisha again reminds Rudy of the fact that their grandmother, Claire Latrea, is an extremely unpleasant person. Rudy nevertheless feels that he will be okay, as he has experience dealing with unpleasant people. Their group is welcomed into the home, and they wait for Claire in the drawing room. Rudy notes that Aisha is dressed as a servant with her usual frilly dress, and he invites Aisha to sit while they wait. Aisha hesitates, but reluctantly agrees. Soon an old woman, who Rudy quickly identifies as Claire, enters the room. Rudy stands to greet her, but is ignored. Claire is accompanied by Andal, who introduces himself to Rudy as their family physician. Claire then reprimands Aisha for sitting down, as she labels Aisha as merely a maid. Rudy quickly tries to defend Aisha, explaining that he told Aisha to sit down, and that Aisha is his sister and should not be treated as a maid. Claire responds by saying that people are identified based on their clothes, and that those wearing a maid uniform will be treated as a maid. Then Rudeus asks why he was initially ignored. Claire said she ignored him as she couldn't rule out the possibility that he was an imposter, and judged it was best to not reply to his greeting. Claire acknowledges that Zenith is real, and that she remembers Aisha as well. Then she asks Rudy to prove that he is his grandson. Rudy states that the fact that he has brought Zenith and Aisha and has her letter is proof enough. Claire's eyebrows twitch, and she responds that she is then not able to recognize him as a member of Latrea House. He countered that he is one of the heads of the Grey Rat family, and has no need to be recognized as being a part of the Latrea family. He explains that he has close ties with Queen Ariel, and that he is a subordinate to the Dragon God. After acknowledging his social standing, Claire apologizes for her earlier impoliteness, and properly introduces herself as Claire Latrea. Likewise, Rudeus gives himself a proper introduction to Claire. Then they all take a seat and have tea. Rudy invites Aisha to sit as well. Claire's eyebrows twitch, but she does not protest. Zenith is being examined by the physician. Rudy apologizes for being unable to cure Zenith. Claire dismissively replies that a village such as Rudy's hometown would likely have limited means to treat curses. Rudy counters that he has actually had significant access to expertise in healing magic, through the healers in Sharia, as well as through the help of both Orsted and Perugius. Claire doesn't believe that Rudy knows Perugius, and she then abruptly changes the subject and asks how Norn is doing. He explains that she is enrolled in Renoa Magic University, and that she was left behind so that her studies wouldn't be affected. Rudy tells Claire that Norn is doing well in her studies and is student council president, to Claire's surprise. Claire then commands Rudy to bring Norn to Millis after her graduation so that Claire can find a partner for Norn to marry. Claire makes clear that the person that Norn marries is ultimately Claire's decision, as she's the head of the family. Rudy reflects on how the warnings were true about Claire being unpleasant. The doctor then finishes his examination of Zenith. He notes how Zenith's body is healthy, and that she appears younger than her actual age. The doctor then asks Rudy and Aisha various questions such as about Zenith's diet, day-to-day activities, physical and mental health. He tells Claire that he sees no issues with Zenith, and that even her mind seems stable. Claire asks if Zenith can give birth to more children, which the doctor confirms is possible. Then Rudy jokes that he feels they are planning his mother's second marriage. Claire gives him a cold look and states that in Millis, a woman's worth is dependent on her ability to give birth. Claire then abruptly changes the subject again and tells Rudy to cut ties with the person of the Pope's faction. She is aware of Rudy's friendship with Cliff. The Latrea family have started to associate with the Cardinal's faction, who wish to ostracize the demon race. Simply not supporting the Pope's faction is not enough. Claire commands that Rudy cut all ties with anybody associated with the Pope's faction. Rudy asks if he at least remain friends with Cliff, but Claire refuses. She states that if he continues to associate with the Pope's faction, he will not be permitted to stay in the Latrea house. Rudy feels the situation is hopeless and tries to calm himself. He rationalizes to himself that he knew Claire had a difficult personality, and that he knew his friendship with Cliff could cause problems with his relationship with Claire. She then commands Rudy to leave Zenith here and to depart. Referring to Zenith, she announces that as long as this thing can give birth, Zenith can be married off. Claire intends to marry her off to the nobility of the Cardinal faction. Claire notes that Zenith's healthy body is a blessing in disguise. Rudy is livid at hearing these words from Claire, at how she treats her own daughter like an object. So Rudeus is not able to remember what happens next. He remembers shouting loudly, grabbing Zenith and quickly leaving the Latrea residence, and easily pushing any guards aside with magic. He soon finds himself at the border of the Holy District. When Rudy's anger settles down, he's comforted by Aisha with a hug. Aisha muses that they weren't able to make a connection with the Latrea house for their mercenary company. Rudy had almost forgot about this, so he announces that he doesn't want Claire's assistance anyway, and he decides to try to make connections with Cliff's faction instead. It is now late, so they decide to once again lodge at Cliff's house. So Rudy returns to Cliff's house, and he sees Cliff hugging an unfamiliar woman. He initially assumes that Cliff is cheating on Alinalise. Cliff asks Rudy why he has returned, as Rudy had initially planned to stay at the Latrea house. Rudy recounts his visit to the Latrea house and his meeting with Claire. Cliff tries to get Rudy to consider the situation from Claire's perspective. He has Rudy consider that by marrying Zenith to nobility, she will be able to receive assistance. Rudy acknowledges to himself that he didn't consider this. Cliff offers him to stay at his home, and Rudy considers sending Zenith back to Sharia to protect her from the Latrea family. But Cliff suggests that it would be a pity to send her back so soon after finally returning to her hometown. Rudy agrees that it's reasonable to at least let Zenith visit her hometown before heading back to Sharia. Then Cliff introduces Wendy, the unfamiliar woman. She is a childhood friend of Cliff, from when they lived together in the orphanage. Rudy then asks Aisha of her opinion on whether he should send Zenith back to Sharia at once, or to stay for a short while to let her visit her hometown. Cliff confirms that he feels his house will be safe from the Latrea. So, they ultimately feel that the chance of being harassed by the Latrea is low, and that they will remain in Cliff's house. Cliff offers Rudy to meet his grandfather and make connections with his faction, and Rudy agrees to do it. The next day they go to the Millis church headquarters. But Rudy is stopped at the entrance as he doesn't have a license to enter. Cliff enters and promises Rudy he will make a temporary license for him. So Rudy decides to stroll around the grounds outside the building. There he admires the Saraku flowers, a plant with pink-colored flowers that bloom at the beginning of spring. He then sees a plump young lady with a frilled dress. She is surrounded by 7 men who shower her with praise and address her as Miko-sama. They are wearing armor, and Rudy estimates that they are at least advanced rank in swordplay. The men turn towards Rudy and ask if he is a follower of the Millis faith. When he doesn't answer immediately, they unsheathe their swords and point them at him. They accuse him of being an infidel and heretic. Rudy tries to apologize, but they decide to kill him. Rudy continues to try to de-escalate as he doesn't want to cause a scene and ruin the beautiful garden. So Rudy prepares his magic for combat when a female knight interrupts to ask what is happening. The men address her as captain and claim that Rudy was inflicting danger on Miko. Rudy retorts that this is a lie. The female knight then recognizes Rudy and warmly welcomes him. The woman is Therese Latrea, Zenith's younger sister and Rudeus' aunt, and she assisted Rudeus during his voyage from the Millis continent to the central continent many years ago. Therese is the leader of these men, and on her command, the men quickly withdrew their swords. Rudy chats with Therese and tells her about his meeting with Claire. Therese tries to defend Claire, saying that there might have been a misunderstanding. Therese is in high spirits, and she asks him how Eris is doing, and learns that they are now married with a child. Therese is currently Miko's escort, and manages these men. Miko then joins the conversation, and Rudeus introduces himself as Dragon God Orsted's subordinate, and as Eris's husband. It turns out that Eris was the one that saved Miko's life over 10 years ago, when she set out to exterminate goblins, but ended up stopping an assassination. Miko thanks Orsted for ultimately saving her life, but Rudeus clarifies that he and Eris actually didn't know Orsted 10 years ago. But if she feels a sense of debt toward Orsted, Orsted would be able to express his appreciation in the future. Rudy also explains that Orsted has a curse that makes people hate him. Miko stares at him and confirms he is telling the truth. She reveals that this is her power. Rudy asks her if Hitogami has appeared in her dreams. She denies that this has ever occurred and states it can never happen. Rudy believes her and wonders if it may be somehow related to her power. Miko then asks Rudeus to tell her more about Eris. Rudy agrees, but before he can do so, he is interrupted by Cliff calling out for him, presumably having attained a license for him. So Rudy and Miko and her entourage part ways, but they promise to meet again to talk about Eris. Rudy also entrusts a message to Therese to pass to Claire, that he will carry the responsibility for my mother's problem, so interference is futile.
So guys, that's all for this video. And if you guys enjoyed it, then make sure to subscribe the channel for more videos like this.